The dinner reservation was for 7 o'clock. I remember that detail because I had made it myself, called the restaurant 3 weeks in advance, requested the corner table by the window, the one with the view of the river. 11 years together, 3 of them married, and I still planned everything down to the centerpiece. That was just who I was. Or maybe that was just who I had learned to be around my husband. The night started beautifully. Candles. Good wine. My husband in the charcoal suit I had picked out for his birthday. His brother sitting across from us, already on his second drink before the appetizers arrived. I excused myself after the bread came. The restaurant was busy and the restroom was tucked around the back of the bar, past the private dining room with the frosted glass doors. I remember thinking the hostess looked overwhelmed. I remember thinking I should tip extra. I was coming back when I heard them. I almost didn't stop. The voices blended with the background noise at first. Silverware, jazz, other people's laughter. But then my brother-in-law said my name. Not warmly. The way someone says a name when they're making a point. She's always been like that. Too trusting. Too... I don't know. Easy. My feet went still. My husband laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh. Not a laugh that said, "Come on, man, that's not fair." It was a real laugh, loose and genuine. The kind that only comes when someone says something you've already been thinking. She doesn't ask questions, my husband said. That's what I love about her. The way he said love, it didn't sound like a compliment. His brother said something else, lower, and I couldn't catch it. But my husband's response came through clearly enough. She's not going anywhere. She never has. I stood there for 4 seconds, maybe 5, long enough to understand that this wasn't a one-time joke between brothers. Long enough to feel the shape of something I had been refusing to look at for a very long time. Then I smoothed my dress, walked back to the table, and smiled at both of them. I am very good at smiling. His name is Marcus. My husband. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Buckhead when I was 29. He was charming in that quiet, self-assured way that reads as confidence until you're deep enough in to realize it was always something else. I was a project manager at an architecture firm. He was in commercial real estate. Our lives made sense together on paper and off it. I thought I had been careful. I thought I had chosen well. His brother, Derek, had never liked me. He had never been outright rude. Nothing I could point to, no scene I could describe at a family gathering without sounding paranoid. It was subtler than that. The way he'd interrupt me mid-sentence and address Marcus instead. The way he looked at me at our wedding, like I was a pleasant but temporary inconvenience. 3 years of small moments I had filed away and never examined too closely, because examining them would have meant asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. After dinner that night, Marcus drove home relaxed and easy, one hand on the wheel, talking about whether we should renovate the kitchen this summer or wait another year. I answered in all the right places. I agreed about the kitchen. I said I was tired when we got home, that the wine had gone to my head. He fell asleep in 20 minutes. I lay next to him and stared at the ceiling and thought about the word easy and everything it contained. I want to be honest about something because I've seen the way people talk about women in situations like this. The implication that we must have been foolish or blind or somehow complicit in what was done to us. I was none of those things. I had a full life and a demanding career and a marriage I was working at, the way people work at marriages. I wasn't naive. I was trusting, which is different, and I had trusted Marcus because I had no specific reason not to, until the night at the Riverview table, when I stood in a hallway and heard his voice say she's not going anywhere in exactly the tone a man uses when he knows he's right. That was the moment I understood that trust had been used against me as a tool. After that, I started paying attention differently. I didn't say anything to Marcus. I didn't ask questions, didn't change my behavior, didn't give him any reason to think anything had shifted. I went to work, I came home, I made weekend plans and attended his company happy hour and texted his mother on her birthday. I played the role I had apparently been cast in without my knowledge. And quietly, methodically, I started looking. The first thing I found wasn't what I expected. I wasn't snooping for infidelity, not at first. I was looking for something more specific. I wanted to understand what my husband actually believed about our marriage, about me, whether that dinner conversation was an anomaly or a pattern. I found the texts 3 weeks later. Marcus wasn't careless with his phone, but he had never bothered to change the cloud backup settings, and after 8 years of using the same Apple ID, I still had the secondary access I'd set up when we bought matching phones on a promotion. I had forgotten about it entirely. He had forgotten I had it. I opened the backup on a Tuesday morning when Marcus was at a site walk. I sat at the kitchen island with my coffee and I read. The text was Derek went back over a year, mostly mundane. Sports, weekend plans, a running joke about a coworker of Derek's I'd never heard of. But threaded through the mundane were other things. Small things. The kind of small things that accumulate into a portrait. She asked about the Nashville account again. Just redirect her. Tell her the bonus structure changed. She'll accept it. Don't let her talk to Griffin directly. She'll start connecting things. Griffin was my husband's business partner. I had met him maybe 4 times. I read the thread twice, slowly, with my coffee going cold beside me. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and sat with what I had just learned. My husband hadn't just underestimated me, he had been actively managing my understanding of our finances, our shared finances, in coordination with his brother, redirecting my questions, crafting explanations, making sure I accepted things without pushing further. I thought about every conversation I'd had in the last year where I'd asked a question and been given an answer that felt slightly off, slightly too tidy, and I had let it go because I trusted him. I thought about the word easy. I was not emotional about it. I was, and I want to be precise here, very, very clear. The first call I made was to my friend Justine. She had been a financial advisor before she moved into consulting, and she was the most discreet person I had ever met. We had been friends since our 20s. The kind of friends who could go 4 months without talking and pick up without a single awkward beat. I told her what I had found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Don't touch anything yet. Don't move money. Don't close accounts. Don't change anything. First, you need to understand the full picture. Can you get into the joint accounts? I could. I had always had full access, or what I believed was full access. What Justine walked me through over the next 2 weeks was the specific and disorienting experience of discovering that the financial life you believed you shared with someone is not, in fact, the one that exists. There was a joint account I knew about. There was also an LLC Marcus had filed in Delaware 18 months ago, one I had never heard mentioned, with Derek listed as a co-manager. There were transfers between that entity and our joint account, not large enough to flag, each one individually unremarkable. A pattern that only looked like a pattern if you were looking. He's been using marital assets to fund a separate business venture, Justine said. Without your knowledge or consent. That's not a gray area. I had a name for what I was dealing with now. That made it easier to think clearly. I called a family law attorney the following Monday. Her name was Patricia Holt, and her assistant had a 3-week wait for new consultations. I took the earliest available slot, and I did not tell Marcus I had made the appointment. Meanwhile, life continued exactly as it had. I made dinner on the nights it was my turn. I watched the show Marcus liked, even though I found it tedious. I drove with him to his parents' house for Easter and sat across from Derek at their dining room table and passed him the breadbasket and asked about his job with a pleasantness that cost me nothing, because by that point I was operating entirely behind a wall of glass. Derek, to his credit, seemed uncomfortable. He watched me a few times during the meal in a way that read almost like suspicion, as if some part of him sensed the air had changed. I smiled at him warmly. He smiled back, uncertain. The thing about being underestimated for years is that when you finally decide to stop performing helplessness, no one can see the difference right away. They're still seeing the version of you they built in their heads. They're not looking at who you actually are. That gave me time. Patricia Holt, it turned out, was thorough, unsentimental, and exactly what I needed. After our first consultation, she connected me with a forensic accountant named Robert, who specialized in asset discovery in divorce cases. Robert found 3 things in the first 2 weeks that Patricia described, drilly, as highly actionable. I will not pretend the process was clean or painless. Learning the full scope of what Marcus had done was like pulling on a thread and watching an entire sweater unravel, each new piece of information revealing a previous assumption about my marriage that had been false. It was not devastating in the way I might have expected. It was more like a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, that just quietly settles into your chest and stays there. I cried once, in my car in a parking garage after a meeting with Robert, with my hands on the wheel and the engine running and no particular destination. About 10 minutes. Then I drove home. 6 weeks after the dinner at the Riverview restaurant, Marcus started acting differently. Not dramatically. Nothing that would have read as guilt to someone who wasn't watching closely. He was a little more attentive, a little more present at dinner, asking about my day with a focus that felt practiced. Once or twice, I caught him looking at me in a way I couldn't quite categorize, like he was taking inventory. I thought perhaps Derek had said something, or perhaps Marcus had noticed some small shift in me that he couldn't name and was trying to recalibrate. Either way, I kept steady. The moment that mattered came on a Thursday evening in late April. Marcus had come home tense, which he usually tried to hide better than he was hiding it that night. He poured himself a bourbon before he even took his jacket off. We ate dinner. He was quiet. Afterward, while I was loading the dishwasher, he said, "There's something going on with the Nashville deal. Some paperwork issue. I might need to restructure some things." I turned around. What kind of restructuring? He looked at me, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something move across his face. Not guilt exactly, more like the particular discomfort of a man who has always controlled the frame and can feel, for the first time, that something has shifted outside of it. "Nothing major," he said. "Just some bookkeeping." I nodded. I said that sounded like a headache. I finished loading the dishwasher and went to bed at my normal time. The next morning I texted Robert. What happened over the following 2 weeks I will describe plainly, because the plain facts are sufficient. The forensic account Robert had assembled went to Patricia. Patricia filed. Marcus was served at his office on a Wednesday morning. I know this because I was at mine, in a meeting about a commercial build in Midtown, when Patricia's assistant sent me a text confirming it was done. I finished the meeting. I took detailed notes. I ate lunch with 2 colleagues at the sandwich place on the corner and listened to one of them talk about her daughter's soccer tournament. Marcus called 4 times that afternoon. I let each call go to voicemail. Derek called twice. I blocked his number. When I got home that evening, Marcus was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen island, the same island where I had read those texts 2 months earlier, with his phone in his hand and an expression I had never seen on him before. The particular expression of a man who has realized, too late, that the situation he believed he controlled had been operating on entirely different terms. "You knew," he said. I set my bag down. I took off my coat. I poured myself a glass of water. "I've known for a while," I said. He started talking. Explanations. Context. The deal was complicated. Derek had suggested it. It was always meant to be temporary. He was going to tell me when the time was right. The words came out in a structure that was almost impressive, the architecture of a man who was very good at making things sound reasonable. I waited until he was finished. "The filing covers everything Patricia found," I said. "If there's anything else, now would be the time to make sure she knows about it." He stared at me. Marcus. I said his name once, flatly. She's thorough. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, he asked if I had already spoken to a lawyer when I was asking him about the Nashville account. When I had looked him in the eye at Easter dinner and passed his brother the bread. Yes, I said. He put his head in his hands. I stayed in a hotel for 4 nights while the initial process got underway. Not because I was asked to leave, I was not, but because I wanted the distance, the cleanness of a room that was only mine. I ordered room service the first night and ate it in bed watching a documentary about migratory birds. I slept better than I had in months. Justine came by on the second evening with wine and leftover pasta from a dinner she'd made. We sat on the hotel bed and she made me tell her the whole thing from the beginning, and she said at various points, he really thought you'd never look, and Robert is genuinely excellent at his job, and, near the end, I'm proud of you, you know. I didn't feel proud. I felt tired in the specific way you feel tired when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and have only just set it down. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than that. The 4th night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Just one line. Derek here. We need to talk. I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back. There's nothing to talk about. If you have questions, contact Patricia Holt. I blocked that number too. The divorce took 8 months. I will not describe all of it, because most of it was paperwork and waiting in the specific tedium of legal proceedings. Patricia was strategic and relentless. Robert's documentation was meticulous. By the end, the settlement reflected the full scope of what Marcus had done with marital assets, which was significant enough that his attorney pushed hard for mediation before trial. We mediated. I came out with the house, a substantial cash settlement, and the knowledge that the Delaware LLC had been dissolved. Marcus sent me one email, 3 weeks after everything was finalized. The subject line said, "Please read this." I opened it. He wrote that he understood he had no right to ask for anything, that he took responsibility, that he hoped someday I could see that not everything had been calculated, that some of it had been real. He said he was sorry. He said he missed me. I read it twice. I thought about the laugh in the restaurant, loose and genuine. I thought about, she's not going anywhere. Then I closed the email. I did not reply. I did not delete it either. I moved it to a folder I labeled Archive, and I closed the folder, and I have not opened it since. That was 14 months ago. I am still in the house, though I've been slowly making it different. New paint in the bedroom, furniture rearranged, a reading chair in the corner that was always too cluttered before. Small acts of reclamation. The kitchen renovation never happened, and now I'm thinking about doing it completely differently than we'd planned. Opening up the wall, adding an island with seating, making it a room that feels like mine. I went back to the Riverview restaurant once, about 6 months after everything was done. By myself on a random Tuesday. I requested the corner table. I ordered the lamb, which Marcus had never wanted because he didn't like the way it smelled. I had a glass of very good wine and watched the river in the dark and didn't think about anything in particular. The hostess asked if everything was all right, if I was waiting for someone. I told her I was not waiting for anyone, that I was right where I meant to be. She smiled and moved on. And I finished my wine, and when the check came, I tipped generously, and I walked out into the evening alone and felt, for the first time in longer than I could measure, completely like myself. I don't know what I would say to Marcus if I saw him now. I don't think about it often enough to have worked it out. I know what I would say to the woman I was at that dinner table, the one who heard what she heard and chose, very deliberately, not to react, who walked back to her seat and smiled and started paying attention in an entirely different way. I would say you were never what they decided you were, and it turns out that's the one thing they couldn't account for. That feels true. It feels like enough. I've thought a lot about what made everything possible. Not the lawyer, not the forensic accountant, not even Justine, as essential as she was. What made it possible was a single decision I made standing in that hallway with the jazz music behind me and my husband's laugh still in the air. I decided not to react. I decided to think instead. That sounds simple. It wasn't. Every part of me wanted to walk back to that table and say something that would shatter the evening. And maybe there's a version of me that did that made a scene, cried in the car, confronted Marcus that same night with nothing but hurt feelings and no evidence and no plan. That version of me would have been completely understandable. She also would have lost. The thing nobody tells you about being underestimated is that it only works as a weapon if you don't know it's being used. The moment I understood what Marcus and Derek believed about me, that I was manageable, that I was easy, that I wouldn't look too closely or push too hard, I stopped being vulnerable to it. Their assumption became my advantage. I had been handing them that advantage for years without knowing it. Once I knew, I stopped. I think about Marcus sometimes and I don't feel angry anymore, which surprised me when I noticed it. What I feel is something closer to clarity. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who had learned that certain behaviors went unchallenged, and so he kept doing them. Derek wasn't a villain either. He was just someone who had decided a long time ago what kind of person I was, and never bothered to update that judgment. People like that don't make exceptions. They don't look for evidence that contradicts their picture of you. That's what made them so easy to move around in the end. What I keep coming back to, and I've turned this over 100 times in the 14 months since, is the question of what I owe myself. Not in a grand philosophical sense, just in practical terms. Do I owe myself the truth, even when it's uncomfortable to look for? Do I owe myself the effort of understanding my own situation clearly, even when someone I love has a stake in me not understanding it? The answer, I know now, is yes. That's not selfishness. That's the baseline. You cannot make good decisions about your life from inside a version of it that someone else constructed for you. Justine told me once, the night she came to the hotel with pasta and wine, that she'd been watching me for years hold everything together and assume the best about people who weren't earning it. She said it gently, the way only old friends can say something that stings. I didn't argue with her because she was right. I had confused patience with passivity. I had called it trust when sometimes it was just avoidance. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from what happened to me. Not that you should be suspicious of people you love. Not that marriage is a risk not worth taking. Just that paying attention, really paying attention, with clear eyes and no apology, is not a betrayal of trust. It's the foundation of it, and when someone shows you who they are, in a restaurant hallway on a Thursday night with jazz playing in the background, the most important thing you can do is believe them. I believed Marcus. Just not in the way he expected.